Hey everyone, welcome to Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of DevOps trends, AWS news, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community, plus a live Q&A that you can't find anywhere else. It's October 25th, 2023. I'm your host, Eric Osterman. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator for startups that helps teams who are overwhelmed with AWS. We do this by using our 200 plus Terraform modules that have been battle tested and downloaded over 10 million times. No matter where you find yourself on this journey, we're here to help you, your startup, whether it's to build a reliable, modern, scalable infrastructure, transform ClickOps into a well-oiled DevOps machine, or leverage our open source rock-solid Terraform blueprints. We have your back regardless. And the result is you launch better products faster, free up your bandwidth for innovation, and nail your value delivery every time. And if you or your team have been banging your head against the wall with underperforming infrastructure, just head over to cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and we'll chart a roadmap to success for free. Worst case, you get a clear roadmap for shoring up your infrastructure. Best case, we co-build it with you and empower your DevOps team in 90 days or less. Now, how can you maximize today's session? First off, our format is very informal. Engage as much as you'd like. Ask questions. And if you're curious about any of our open source tools or modules, go for it. For those on the recording, we host these calls live, so don't miss out. Join us by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. Now, I have one ask. If you find any portion of today's office hours valuable, share it with your team. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse, or maybe send us a short testimonial about the value you're getting. Do that by going to Slack. We're on slack.cloudposse.com. Remember, we're not simply creating content here. We're building a community, and we can't do that without your help. So with that said, let's jump into the news. Lots of things hit my radar this time. The one that undoubtedly many of you have seen, especially if you are a 1Password user, is that there was a breach disclosed concerning 1Password linked to their IDP, Okta. So I think what happened was the cookies containing the login credentials of support engineers at Okta were compromised. And then that allowed them to impersonate that engineer and access 1Password. However, quick responses, anomaly detection, and short session tokens all helped mitigate the impact of this. And I believe there was no actual compromised account in that sense, like loss of credentials and so forth. Anyone have more to add to that? All right. The other announcement was Microsoft launches Radius. For those of you who haven't heard about Radius, it's been around for 80 years. No, I'm joking. Kind of interesting how I think we've run out of project names at this point, especially one-word project names. And now it's, now it's favorable. We can just recycle project names every, 10, 15 years, just overload them to mean something else. Anyways, they have launched Radius, an open source application platform for the cloud native era. It is building on their experience launching other products like Kata, which is awesome, and we use that, and other things. I think they're trying to make it easier to define end-to-end what it takes to deploy an application, including its architecture, packages, and so forth. And it's not trying to reinvent some parts of the wheel. For example, it will build on top of Terraform or leverage Terraform modules that you create. More than that, I don't know. It seems like an ambitious endeavor. There's so many of these platforms now, I can't keep track of them. Has anyone dug into this one deeper? All right. Next announcement is this Togomak. I thought this was kind of interesting. It's obviously appealing towards a Terraform crowd. Now, what is Togomak? I would rebrand it instead as more like a task runner, something like GoTask or a Makefile alternative. rake file. It is a way of defining declaratively a workflow that you execute locally and run. A similar tool like that might be Atmos. Now, this is a lot more Terraformy. In fact, it looks a lot like Terraform for anybody who's used it, and supports some of the same constructs, such as a Terraform style for each loop, which, you know, my eyes bleed every time I see those, but I understand why it had to be that way. Why this is interesting is if your team is already using a tool like Terraform, perhaps, and they're already familiar with HCL and you really like HCL, maybe you want to declaratively describe in a less opinionated way how you run your workflow like Terraform. So you might be using tools like Atmos or TerraGrunt or Terramate or others. Those have opinionated workflows for Terraform specifically implemented at the Golang level. Now, what if you abstracted that away so you could define your various stages and what needs to happen at each one of those stages? There's another tool like this that we were actually anybody using Atmos who's been with us for a while might remember about 2.5 years ago or something, maybe 3 years ago, we actually built the first version of Atmos on a tool called Variant 2 by Mumoshu. Mumoshu is one of these geniuses who contributes to like 25 open source projects, one of the core maintainers of Helm file, super productive and friendly person. He wrote this. This is also using HCL as a generic purpose task runner of sorts. Different syntax obviously doesn't resemble Terraform as much. This was designed to do a little bit more of what we do in Atmos, which is encapsulate a lot of commands so that you can provide a single CLI interface for your dev team that exposes the tool chain that you use in a consistent manner. But it also has pipeline type capabilities. All right, any thoughts on this tool? Here was something that was shared by someone to me as an example of a nice reference architecture for Terraform. Obviously, this is designed or in an opinionated manner for the Ministry of Justice out of the UK. There's been other repositories like this. I think we recently talked about the deprecation of another initiative out of the Ministry of UK or alphagov.uk, that was deprecated. But this one is under active development. And I think it's a great example of what a homegrown, mature solution adopting Terraform might look like. And I don't mean that necessarily in a derogatory manner, but I think that there's lots of things that as practitioners at Cloud Posse doing this that we improve upon, but it's as part of our closed reference architecture. So what are some of the nice things here? One is they have their architecture design records kept here, incrementing so you can understand their decisions as they go. And those look to be being updated. They also are leveraging separation of config from Terraform code. So if we go to Terraform code, here's their business logic, here are their modules. I believe environments are their Terraform root modules, if I understand correctly. So they're defining a root module per environment. We consider that an anti-pattern because you still are building two large root modules and your root modules aren't necessarily as reusable as they could be. But it's a common pattern. If I go into one of these, like each one of these represents, I believe, a organizational unit and perhaps an account. I'm just guessing here, seeing this core logging, for example, a core logging account. And underneath here, you see it's all Terraform code, but the configuration itself has been abstracted away. And we consider that a good pattern at Cloud Posse. So their configuration is stashed away in their, let's see here, I think it's in environments here, and it's defined as JSON. So this is a common pattern more and more in the Terraform community, using something like YAML or something like JSON to define your configuration, as opposed to using your TF-var files directly. What's nice about using something like JSON or TF-var or YAML versus TF-vars is TF-vars you can easily load in Terraform at runtime. They have to be passed into your Terraform application. Versus JSON, you can read and decode. YAML, you can read and decode. We prefer at Cloud Posse not using JSON for a lot of reasons, because ultimately this configuration is for humans, and while JSON is friendly and readable, it is devoid of comments. And I really hate walls of JSON even more than I hate walls of YAML. So if you want to have comments and understand what's going on in your configuration, I don't believe you should be using JSON. You'll see that they've defined their configuration here by environments and set some common things that they expect for each of these environments. They use the same pattern in other places. I'm not sure if I think it was, yeah, under, don't remember maybe where. Yeah, on environment network. So then they have a similar pattern that they've implemented now to define their networks. So this is, again, something of a factory pattern where you write your module, but then you can create all these configs, and then your module can, like a factory, produce now networks or something. If you like these patterns, then I suggest you consider another tool called Atmos, which solves that in a repeatable manner, a very dry manner, using YAML, which can have comments. And we go into all those concepts here of stacks, for example. And a stack is a YAML configuration that allows you to define all that configuration, and then it just gets generated to a TF-var file that gets passed to Terraform. This is the factory pattern as well. And what's nice about our pattern here is you don't have to implement it for each root module that you write, like implement a factory pattern for a network root module, implement one for your environment root module, implement one for another root module. No, implement everything through configuration in your YAML configs and have a simple tool that builds, compiles, assembles that, and spits out the Terraform var file that you need for your Terraform code. It does a whole lot more than that. I'm just drawing an analog to what they're doing here in the modernization platform. All right. The next thing, it's nice that they're doing policy enforcement. They provide a bunch of policies here out of the box that their members can get started with. They're using conftest under the hood for that. They have a separate folder for their scripts, their helper scripts. This is exactly also the problem we ran into at Cloud Posse. In homegrown environments, scripts are okay, right? You get by with it. But it's really specialized to that environment. No two companies have the same homegrown infrastructure scripts. They're written in different standards with different level of validation, and that's a lot of scripting to maintain. So it's good that they have some scripts and they're codifying those processes as scripts, but this is just too much in my mind. This is what gets radically reduced by using some of the Cloud Posse tooling that we have around Atmos, around our GitHub Actions. So you see they have scripts for how to do a Terraform apply, how to do a Terraform init, how to do a Terraform plan, and so forth. So that gets me to the next thing to review, GitHub Actions. So what's awesome is that they are leveraging GitHub Actions. So users of the modernization platform can get immediate bang for the buck and start leveraging GitHub Actions and those workflows. Whew. Except for the implementation. This is a lot of repetitiveness, and this is defined in every single one. Maybe they're using code generation for that. Okay, that's an improvement. But really, these should be using shared workflows at this time. It should be using some combination, actually, of composite actions and shared workflows to make your GitHub Actions more usable and more maintainable. And that's what you'll see when you look at the Cloud Posse actions for Terraform, for Atmos, and all of that. So you'll see literally something that looks very similar to this. First of all, this is non-obvious code, right, to grok and absorb. I think for any newcomer to the project, this would be a hard thing to get your head around. And then when you want to make changes, oh my God, you got a workflow for every single environment, and they're not using shared workflows. So hopefully that's on their list of improvements to make. And let's see what else, other comments here. They have a nice README showing where to get started, what everything is used for, a description of the modules and some of the dependencies that you have. Maybe it doesn't all belong in the root README, but the fact that it is documented is nice. Oh, and I think they're using Terraform to manage the GitHub repository itself. Yeah, so they're using GitHub itself also to manage the repository. So that's also a cool practice. I didn't take a deeper look at it. Curious if anyone else has taken a look at this repository as well. All right. Matt, any comments? Nope.
It definitely looks like a lot of large enterprise Terraform implementations I've seen before.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people who have done this, and it's actually like, it's kind of sad that the number of large organizations that probably have gone through the exact same journey to do these kinds of things and invent these scripts and invent config, ways to store config and ways to automate it and ways to do it. Like, if there were a canonical way to do all of this, like, that would actually have saved like the industry probably tens of thousands of hours, you know, over the years in reinventing the wheel over and over again.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, maybe I should bring that up. I have a sanitized version of that other doc I wrote, Matt, on yeah, kind of Terraform progressions that users take. If we have time today, I'll get to that. Otherwise, make a note for that next week. All right. Let's see here. One that hits close to heart here. Cloud Posse has released over the past couple of weeks 2 new important features to Atmos. Again, Atmos is our workflow automation tool. We use it extensively with Terraform and other tools similar to it. So what we've done is we've introduced now support for a vendor YAML file. First, though, it'd be helpful to understand what do we mean when we talk about vendoring. Let's see here. So vendoring is, generically this concept where you pull in all of your dependencies locally so you can run your app. That vendoring is implemented differently in different languages and different tooling. In some ecosystems, it's best practice to commit those vendored files. Other times it isn't. Within the whole Node community, packages.json is frequently used to vendor in all of your dependencies at build time to create a package. Well, the more and more you work with infrastructure, you start depending on configuration, code, like Terraform code, and packages that might reside or be maintained by other teams, other organizations, other companies. And within your company, you might want to do things like create a service catalog of your Terraform modules or root modules. And there needs to be some way to pull in all of those dependencies in a consistent way. Terraform does that very well when it comes to modules, but Terraform doesn't do that very well when it comes to your root modules. Technically, there's a command when you run Terraform init It can pull down our root module, but there are other limitations to using that I can go into if somebody wants to know. The other thing that you might want to do is actually pull down other kinds of artifacts that compose your infrastructure. There are other ways of doing this. A lot of companies end up creating like maybe a make file that will clone a bunch of repos. Maybe you're using Git subtrees, maybe using Git submodules. It's a very Git-centric approach. It's not a very user-friendly approach. Anybody who's worked with Git subtrees and submodules, will probably admit it took them a day or two before they got totally comfortable with the command line foo, and they have since forgot it since they haven't touched it for 2 years. So vendoring, I think, is a core concept that needs to be very integrated into our tool. So we've extended our support for this. We have supported vendoring for a long time in Atmos, but we implemented it in a very different way. I won't go into the way we first implemented it. That is still supported and it's not going away. However, the new way is you can now define a vendor YAML file. You can import other vendoring files that you depend on. So for example, you might create a vendoring YAML for your baseline infrastructure. You might create one for your compliance layer. You might create one for your networking layer, one for your platform layer, one for your application layer. And that allows you to manage all of those dependencies in individual files. So here's what it looks like. You specify the name of the component. You specify where that's coming from. So we've added support to OCI to Atmos, and this is what's so beautiful. So just like in Helm now and many other systems, OCI is becoming the de facto way of distributing artifacts. It's incredibly fast. Anyone can stand up their own OCI registry very easily. Most of the mainstream public cloud providers provide some sort of an OCI registry. Amazon ECR provides OCI. You can have public registries as well. So we support OCI now. We can publish artifacts to OCI. We can pull them from some version and stash them somewhere in some path or directory. We added the ability to stash those in multiple places. This allows you to do things like downloading, for example, the semver pinned at the patch level, which this here is doing, or maybe pinned at the minor level, which this is doing. So different ways you might want to vendor in your dependencies with versions. Here's an example of what your imports might look like if you had lots of layers. And here's some more details on how we actually process it. I won't go in right now. So that's vendoring in a nutshell. It's implemented using the Atmos vendor sub command. You call Atmos pull, and you just run one command, Atmos pull, and it'll download all your dependencies. Or if you want to target any one of your dependencies, you can specify that here too. So
yeah, look.
Yep, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it looks like Sean Roberts mentioned using vendor as a generic version, which I know you can elaborate on our journey with them.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, Sean. We also are very transparent in our influences, I think, under our reference here, alternatives. These are some of the things that we have been inspired by at Cloud Posse. And what? I'm embarrassed to say, vendor did not make the list. It is one of the things that needs to be added here. So I'm blushing now that it's not here. But yes, we tried to use vendor by Carvel, Tanzu, by VMware early on together with Atmos. What we ran into was the syntax was a little bit overly complicated, I think, just to accomplish what we wanted to be able to do. So let me open up that tool. I think you had a link there in the description, but it's also a good example to bring up for comparison.
Yeah, none of these things are hard. Like you can make thing to do it. It's just having whether it's with Atmos or vendor or something, having a consistent pattern for your team. Because originally what we had was we just had make make targets for each, but then people would start to hack around with them too much. And so we just wanted something generic. And the first thing that popped up at the time was vendor. Okay, this is a generic pattern. We'll just use that.
Yeah. No, that's really cool that you're using vendor. You're on the right track. Like I wouldn't criticize any company using vendor, especially if it worked out for you. What I didn't like was just the overly hierarchical YAML config that you'd have to constantly look up new things if you wanted to accomplish something you wanted to do. Also, the more of those things that you expose to the user, the more crazy things they end up doing that you have to end up supporting. So we decided not against it, but that's a cool tool. All right. Yeah, and I mentioned that we also now support OCI, so that's a great way to push your artifacts. We are going to come out with our GitHub Actions to easily package up components and push them to OCI, but obviously you can do that however you would prefer. We're just going to do a way that's very convenient for people who want to package Terraform artifacts or config artifacts. Okay, moving on. Or any questions on that before I move on? Was there anything else in this chat I didn't see? Somebody else mentioned Big Bang.
I was just mentioning that any sharing any of these things where someone actually shares how they built something is interesting. Like you shared the Terraform one. This is one that I reference every so often, which is the DoD's method for deploying and managing all their Kubernetes clusters.
Oh, okay.
So the repo is massive. This is just a GitLab they have. So if you actually, it was probably better to look at the second link I sent, which shows all the tools that they use, which can give some confidence to people. Like this is all the tools they use, but the whole stack, there's a lot of code behind it for their deployment to Kubernetes, and it supports GKE, EKS, AKS on-prem. Now, whether it's a really good stack, I don't know because I'm not using it. But I have referenced aspects of this, not just this repo, but the wider Iron Bank repository for some of the stuff they use and some of the way they've done stuff to harden it. Especially working in a really secure. It's just interesting to see what people are using and how they're using it. So I thought I'd share.
Thank you. I'm making a note.
Their main page probably describes it better than the Git does. So I wouldn't share that today.
That's actually pretty neat. I had a question. I assume all of these repos you just posted are for offline use, being that it's DoD. Like they're not.
Yeah, these are publicly available. They're publicly available. It's open source.
I don't mean in that sense. I mean like they're typically for systems that don't have access to internet. I know they're publicly available.
No, they use the Big Bang is used within. I'm sure they have an air-gapped version of the repository, but the Big Bang is used, and there's some presentations from the heads of IT at DoD. It's used in. They run Kubernetes. There's a presentation I'll have to find and I'll share maybe for next week's. They run Kubernetes on some F-35s. So
that's
it's not
information. Thank you.
So it's not. There are some super sensitive systems where this stuff runs. It's just why that page mentioned MTLS, a lot of stuff. If you look at the wider Iron Bank, which is where this is the GitLab, it's called the Iron Bank GitLab. I'm not sure if it works from the homepage or not, if I make you log in, but I can find the link so you can see it because this is just Big Bang. This is just Big Bang, everything for that. They have like where they track their Jenkins and then how they hardened it, where they track every single piece of software that they use and how they hardened it. So it can be a useful reference for people that have to deal with FIPS and other security things as well, or just see what they're using. Like they've been using Elasticsearch and now they are standardizing on Loki. They use Argo. They used to use Flux. They're using Argo now. So it doesn't mean the government does stuff better, but if it's good enough for the DoD, then from a security standpoint, it kind of helps me qualify when a compliance officer asks me a question. I'm like, well, the DoD's using it, so probably okay.
That's cool. That's a little gold mine. I'm going to dig through that.
Indeed. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Next announcement was, just in case you were thinking of putting together an errand scam, stealing IPs and trying to resell them, watch out. This guy learned the hard way. I think he was on track to make something like 10 to 14 million, or at least that was the value of all the IPs he had been able to collect via phony applications through a collection of shell companies. He was caught. I guess his business model was then selling these IPs to VPN providers who needed large banks of IPs. Next,
I hadn't actually seen that article, but I'm actually wondering what the criminal offense is. It must be some sort of fraud or something.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So because they got him on fraud. Was it Wire?
Well, wire fraud, I see.
Yeah. He had signed affidavits from fake people who didn't exist.
Oh, yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah. Question. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, another tool, if you've ever used Kubectl exec, which is to get into pods, maybe sometimes you want to get into the node very easily. Well, there's a simple Kubectl plugin called node-shell that lets you do that. So if you get your nodes, you find the name, you just run Kubectl-node-shell and the name of the node, and that will get you in, provided you have everything else that checks off your SSH keys or whatnot.
Yeah. It's a little dangerous if you make this work.
Yeah. Yeah. You might want to question, like, if you are doing why?
Yeah. Yes, why? Exactly.
Another one. I found this interesting. So I've always known Postgres supported a plugin ecosystem. I just didn't understand how large that plugin system had grown. We talked about Tembo, which is a startup building a powerful Kubernetes Postgres hosting solution with support for every plugin under the sun for Postgres. So that's pretty rad. Amazon, on the other hand, hasn't really been supporting too many plugins with Postgres with their offering. I believe PostGIS maybe was one of the early ones they supported for a while. They just came out with the new one for master replication. Well, they've just announced another one now supporting MySQL forward plugin here. So this allows you to execute a subquery against MySQL and then join against that in your Postgres database. So I think this is an interesting precedent or trend. Might be that Amazon is feeling some pressure from other Postgres providers now because there are other cloud offerings in addition to Tembo. I think there's neon.tech doing something. I'm wondering if they're trying to spice up this offering now, offering more plugins because of market pressure. I'm just curious. Anyone know more about that?
I don't, but this is basically turning Postgres into GraphQL. It's basically like call the endpoint, and then it's like it's a resolver that resolves the query like in an independent process, transforms the data, and then sends it back to the original caller. I mean, that's exactly what GraphQL does. I mean, it's kind of weird that you do that in a database, but I get it, I guess. Yeah.
Just curious. Yeah, and if that wasn't enough, you can actually have
you can actually make it. Yeah.
But this is not supported on Aurora, obviously, but it is an interesting play.
It must be supported on Superbase. That's what it just said. That's who created that plugin.
Oh.
So.
Yeah. All right, next announcement is, this was exciting for me, knowing that it was a pretty large liability when you are provisioning an EKS cluster that will presumably not be a total, how you say, it's most EKS clusters that you deploy are pets and not cattle. Let's face it, you're not very easily flipping between your Kubernetes clusters. And if you are, power to you. The problem is when you are deploying EKS has been that whatever networks it was provisioned on are the networks it dies on. You couldn't change those. So if you had accidentally provisioned on the wrong network, or you are changing your network topology, that would be a problem. Now you can apparently rehome that Kubernetes cluster without destruction. I think we were bid on this when deploying the EKS cluster on both public and private subnets. And then deciding, nope, we're done with development. We don't want it on public anymore. Oh, well, we got to redeploy. And the last announcement I had was more like just out of my own curiosity. I never heard of this service before. And it received some updates, I guess. But anyone use this, look into it, can tell me more about how this works and how practical it is?
I actually don't know about this service either. I don't quite understand what it does from that quick description either.
Is this just Route 53 being used for HA?
Yeah, I think it's to help flip your application over between various endpoints, perhaps with more of a controller type logic where it can evaluate maybe.
That's a common pattern. That's behind the scenes. That's how a lot of Amazon services work. Like that's how RDS works. RDS is not complete HA. It's DNS based failover. So if you have a failover event with RDS, you're down for up to 30 seconds. It's probably the same, but made generic. I'm just guessing, made generic to work. Just based on what you're showing on screen, that's exactly how RDS works.
Mm-hmm. Seems to borrow heavily on like some of the nomenclature used in Kubernetes for controllers and operators.
It looks like standard DNS HA, which we've been doing a long time, just put in a generic way so you can use it for anything. Mm-hmm. But I could be wrong.
All right. Any other announcements that we should bring up on the call today? Jonathan, the similarity to Kubectl-exec is just that it allows you to create a shell, but exec is for inside of pods, and this was for inside of nodes. So that was the distinction.
Ah, great. Sorry. Will that work with, I'm sorry, what is the Amazon, I'm blanking on what the Amazon Linux is for nodes.
Amazon AL 2020.
Bottle Rocket.
Bottle Rocket, thank you. Will that work with Bottle Rocket?
Probably not, because there's no concept of like a shell on Bottle Rocket. I believe
So
everything.
You would need nodes that are already pre-configured to allow getting into the node. It won't work on Bottle Rocket. Is still going to security exclude you from that.
I think it's just an SSH tunnel under the hood. So like you have to actually have the SSH daemon running for it to connect to that. I think it's just forwarding that through your kubectl connection.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's see. There's one more announcement regarding HashiCorp. Oh yeah, I did. It was off my screen here. I didn't see it. There is. How do I get to it? Anyways, it's 1.7 alpha came out for Terraform, HashiCorp Terraform. There was nothing that significant to bring up though. Yeah. Looks like
It's
most.
sorry, I thought you were done. Oh, it was not related to this. It was a separate topic.
Oh.
Please continue.
No, the only interesting thing was maybe if you're leveraging the new declarative way of doing imports that hasn't supported for each, now it does. I suppose that's pretty nice because you could possibly define your resources maybe in a file and then have a for each over that, or perhaps you can have your own spec for your imports that you want to resource, that you want to your own spec for the resources you want to import. All right, that's it. Matt?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I saw another announcement that that Amazon is working on an EU sovereign cloud.
Oh, right.
That that came out. Let me see if I can find. I think, yeah, here's the link off my reading list. I think this is it. I just posted it in the Zoom chat. I was trying to figure out exactly exactly why, but and I guess it's basically it's some sort of like independent cloud that is only supported by people who work in the EU and isn't all the other regions they currently have in the EU. It's something that's completely like EU sovereign, I guess, is the whole idea about it. So kind of seems kind of interesting.
So is this another partition?
Yeah, I think it's going to be like GovCloud,
Because they have China,
AWS Public, and China.
China's its own
and,
partition.
And EU, I guess, will have its own like partition, basically.
Yeah, if most people have it worked outside of Amazon partitions, if the way they work is that you can't use shared services. So like if you're on GovCloud or Amazon China, you can't use IAM to talk to people on the things on the US side. You can't use the same images. The whole infrastructure is separate.
Yeah, essentially your root accounts are like two different. You have to have like a different root account in each one of them, basically, and then you can have like an organization in each one. Like you were saying, there's no like shared overlap between the two of them.
Very cool.
They don't mention the word partition, but I'm assuming that's what it is. That's the only way
Yeah.
to create that fully.
Yeah, I assume that that's the way that it works, but I'm a little confused why this is so important, I guess, for the EU, but
Well, it's clients, customers who determine, or their government,
of course,
determine.
yeah.
And so I think it's in anticipation of the EU being like the US government or China's in terms of very, very strict, not otherwise meetable requirements.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Point. All right. Question and answer. Any questions we can get answered today? Questions?
I have a question I'll pose. I have noticed pods going into an error state, and none of the documentation that we found on pod lifecycle, in fact, even kind of reading some of the Kubernetes source code, the Go files on, really mentions the error state. So I'm wondering if anyone has resources on navigating that. This is not a hot problem for us, but I think we've resolved it. But we've resolved kind of, in terms of operating our app. But it's very interesting that some of the pods are getting into this state that is poorly documented at best.
I'm not able to help that one. Anyone else can answer that question? No, sorry about
Okay.
that.
Well, the advice that I have for anyone that finds that is just auto kill those pods. Apparently our Kubernetes was, even though it was listing them as being in an error state, was some of the ALBs and so on were still speaking with them weirdly. It turns out that just killing them is sufficient to stop the errors.
Would have been curious if they were passing health checks.
Yeah, it's we're still looking into whether our health check or liveness check needs some tweaking. But it doesn't, let's say the documentation is scarce, but
What was their uptime? What was the uptime of the pods?
I varied all over the place. They were not new pods. They were potentially, hours old. We suspect something's happening on the pod, whether it's out of memory error or some other error condition that's moving them into that error state. We just can't find documentation on, why, when. But auto killing them seems to do the trick. I just, if anyone has any other insights, I'd love to hear it.
On a unrelated topic, but going back to earlier, the Radius announcement for the application platform by Microsoft. Jim just shared this in the Slack. It's a pretty funny fail. Obviously, when you search for this, the first things that come up is Radius on Microsoft. Nothing.
LDAP authentication to Active Directory circa 2000. Yeah.
Radius is still a key part of those sort of systems.
Yeah, no. I know.
The
I'm just
common
saying,
person
like,
never heard of Radius. It's like only if you dig into deep authentication do you ever see Radius.
Yeah. Or if you're using like Active Directory as a authentication source for infrastructure, like physical infrastructure devices, like routers and switches and all of that kind of thing. That's a protocol that they talk to authenticate against, like a central LDAP server.
Yeah, those you're not gonna find anything with search results with that word.
Yeah.
Very confusing. All right. Any other questions we can get answered today?
I have a quick one.
All right.
It's
Go.
I posted it in the AWS channel, but for about 3 years now, AWS has not supported BuildKit caching in ECR. But with recent, like this year, versions of BuildKit, version 12, you can now use ECR to store your remote caches for your BuildKit builds. There's some syntax to use when you perform your builds, using the cache to argument that allows you to leverage ECRs as a cache repository.
Yeah, I do recall bringing this up. It's something we were following for a while. I as recently as this week, I think I saw people still complaining about issues using it. But have you had a chance to test it out? Is it working well for you, and is it faster?
I only saw the announcement like 30 minutes before Cloud Posse office hours, so I didn't get a chance to try it myself.
Did they only announce this yesterday?
They only announced it yesterday,
Yeah.
but I think the feature's been in for a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, many months.
I think that it actually says that it's not going to be supported until Docker 25 comes out, I think, right? Right there, the first sentence, yeah.
It's interesting.
I guess so. It's in BuildKit,
That
but it's not in Docker native yet. I see.
exactly. So if you're using BuildKit, you find, but Docker in 25.
Yeah, as of 23, I guess. Or wait, what version? Oh no, BuildKit 12 and later.
That makes sense. Well, thanks for clearing that up, Jim. And Matt? Anything else you can answer today? Or we can end early. If there's nothing else, maybe that's all we do. Any other announcements? Can be anything.
I have an interesting one that I'm actually trying to figure out how to solve. So at my engineers, we run K8, obviously. Well, not obviously, but we run K8, and in the past for our auth mechanism, we use this nifty tool called the Oauth2 Proxy. I don't know if anyone has used it before.
Yeah.
But what it allowed us to do is, offload OAuth stuff to the sidecar, to the Oauth2 Proxy sidecar. We ran into issues with it, however, and decided to move to an API gateway. And the API gateway tool we're using basically allows us to have two flows. One is the flow in which it only checks if you have a bearer token, right? And then the other is the flow where it will do the whole authorization code flow. Now, the challenge is our developers have been so used to being able to access our microservice swaggers in the browser. Like if they go to that endpoint, it will redirect them and they'll go to the OAuth flow and they're logged in and they can do whatever they want on the swaggers. So I know like most people might be used to having like an actual authorization button in the swagger where you can put in details and then authorize, but that's not what we're doing. With this API gateway now, they no longer have that. They have to go somewhere else and grab a token and then pass that in the header. And I have a munition on my hands. No one wants to go through that pain because they're used to the other way. I'm just curious does this make sense to anyone? And like, how do people generally solve that for their devs?
But remind me again why you were leaving Oauth2 Proxy?
We had a lot of issues with it actually. It broke so many times with random errors, and a lot of them were like already highlighted on their GitHub issues, and they're still open. And then we also had other reasons why we needed to move to an API gateway, because we want to expose some services publicly and other things. So it seemed like the right time.
Yeah, we were. Go on.
Oh, I was just going to ask if you're talking about specifically so they can see like the Swagger definition of microservices so that they can understand like what the calls are like to an upstream service and
exactly.
all that kind of thing.
They use that a lot in their day-to-day, and it's technically fine. The challenge was that so it's one or the other. We can either have that and they have to pass in a header, or we can have this API gateway redirect them to the flow like Oauth Proxy did. And that works fine too. The problem is when someone is actually working on a microservice locally and wants to test and their code is trying to call the endpoints, the service can't navigate through the flow of logging into a browser, etc. So maybe that's the answer. Maybe I should just tell them, hey, you're gonna have to grab the token and put it in for your microservice when you're working locally.
Isn't it easier to optimize for the latter, where you can modify your code to always send a certain header? When that header is present, then don't do the redirect.
Probably, yeah.
That way you optimize the user experience and the app experience, and the app experience is very easy to custom. It's much easier, I presume, to custom.
Agreed. That makes sense.
For what it's worth, we were using Oauth2 Proxy a lot. Now this was like 3 years ago. Then there was that whole, the project was technically abandoned and bounced between two organizations, and now it was picked up again and I guess has some support. But the project hasn't been without its own problems. And I think Bitly gave up on it. It went to Pusher or something. I forget the org. I don't know where it is now. I think it's its own org, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's its own org now. So
Cool. Thanks for helping me brainstorm that.
yeah, for sure.
But I can't help but think that you mentioned that your microservice is going to talk to other microservices and they need to authenticate through the proxy. To me, that sounds a little strange. Like, why wouldn't your services just connect directly and have your authentication layer be on a layer above in the stack?
A decision was made that every call, microservice to microservice call, should still be authenticated.
Oh, why not use another scheme on that side? Maybe like a PSK or like a mutual authentication using a SSL or TLS.
Yeah,
SSL.
Oauth would add some extra overhead if, between systems at a scale. That's where
for what it's worth, I've seen this pattern a lot where service to service calls go through an API gateway because they use the API gateway for canary routing, for a central point of observational data, for controlling, which version is in production right now, like all of those kinds of things through the API gateway. So that's not that unusual, but I've also clearly seen what you're talking about, Jim, is that, they're making direct like HTTP or gRCP calls like to one another, and there's some authentication layer on top of that, or they take the token that comes in from the public call and pass it along the chain everywhere along the chain, and then there's just a service that can verify that that is in fact valid. So it's being like all the calls are being made in the request or in the context of the original request, that kind of thing. So there's lots of those.
We do. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's an easy one.
Maybe you can plug in Radius.
I would say this is when you bring back Kerberos. People might be annoyed with it, but for service auth, it's very efficient.
Why not just use HT access and just hard code all the passwords and everything right in the file?
This is where some people just fall back to a mesh like Istio. It's not exactly the same thing, but it can handle the authorization and identity between the services and give you the tracing and everything with very little
of course,
because the TLS.
And in that case, you just do certificate-based authentication. Like the two services will mutually authenticate each other and will only accept requests from the service that is green listed, basically, as allowed to make requests to that service.
Yeah, that makes sense. MTLS is future roadmap. But no, this is a very helpful discussion. Thanks.
Yeah.
I saw there was a question in the Slack chat from Ghostface. It looks like your question was answered. I don't know if you're on the call today. If you are, feel free to let me know if you wanted to ask anything more about API Gateway. And with that, sounds like we are at the end of the hour here. So I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone for participating today and answering questions and sharing your insights. We're going to post a recording of this session to our YouTube channel in a few hours. Go to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, youtube.com/cloudposse for that. You can subscribe if you want to get the latest videos to your inbox. For those on the recording, if you want to register for these sessions live, go to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours to register. We also offer this office hours as a podcast. Go to podcast.cloudposse.com to subscribe for that. For anyone interested in working with Cloud Posse and seeing if we can move the needle for you at your organization, just go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz. Answer a few quick questions and you'll book a session directly with me. Talk to you soon. Take care.